Okay, hello everybody. My name is David Dowling. I am a member of the J. Reuben Clark Law Society, and I am a family law mediator in Southern California and also an adjunct professor for the Strauss Institute at Pepperdine. I'm grateful today for the opportunity to talk with two fantastic individuals. We have Benjamin Bull, who is the Senior Vice President, General Counsel and Director of the Law Center at the National Center on Sexual Exploitation. Also joining us is Don Hawkins, who is also a Senior Vice President and Executive Director with NCOSE. Thank you for both being here with me today and sharing a little bit about who you are. So Ben, why don't you introduce yourself and then we'll have Dawn introduce herself.
Well, thank you. I am the General Counsel of the National Center on Sexual Exploitation, which we call NCOSE by the acronym, so I'll refer to it that way if I could. And I have multiple responsibilities. I'm the corporate counsel for the organization, so I advise it on all legal matters. But equally important, perhaps more important, I lead the Law Center, and we have a total of 4 lawyers and 2 support people, and we use the legal system to try to end sexual exploitation wherever it exists. And these days we're focusing so much on online exploitation, and through litigation and through even, we advise the public policy wing of NCOSE, and, and we just do, frankly, whatever it takes on the legal side to be successful, again, to make sexual exploitation go away or smaller, rather than have it continue to grow the way it has been the last decade or so.
Well, welcome. Thank you, Dawn.
Yeah, hello. I'm very grateful for this opportunity to be joining with all of you. My vision and goal is to create a movement that will work towards a world free from sexual abuse and exploitation. And this movement has really come together and coalesced, and we're here begging you to join with us in this movement. So I have 4 kids. I am the executive director. I'm a member of the church also. Many of you, I think, are as part of J. Reuben Clark Society. I've been engaged in this work for 10 years. Like next week is my 10-year anniversary. And we've seen so many miracles and just so much good come in this fight over the last 10 years. And we've come to the point now where there's really now a movement in the courts and legislatures, and we want to tell you about it and invite you to be part of it.
So let me kick off by asking each of you, and I'll ask Dawn first, what drew you? You said that your 10th anniversary is coming up. So why working with NCOSE? Why this work in your practice?
Yeah, I'll go first. So I started here 10 years ago after living in Hungary and in Germany and experiencing just sexual assault and harassment myself, seeing sex trafficking happening on the streets, meeting with young women and young boys who are survivors of child sexual abuse. Like, all of that convened together and just set me on this path to want to combat exploitation and abuse wherever it is. And so when I got back to the United States, I decided I'm going to try my best to spend the rest of my life fighting to defend human dignity. And so that's what I've been doing. Really, the kind of uniqueness, one of the things that makes us different is that we really focus also on the issue of pornography. It's so largely overlooked. Many people just dismiss it as it's something that we can't combat. It's its own beast, or many other people mock it and make jokes of it. But what I saw then is that it really was fueling all these other exploitation and abuse issues, and yet nobody was talking about it. Now, 10 years later, many people are talking about it, and there is just mountains of research about the role pornography plays in fueling other forms of abuse and exploitation. So that's why I came, and we don't only work on the pornography issue, but we really highlight it. And I started because I really felt passionate about combating pornography. So.
And I appreciate you sharing that personal experience, your own perspective and what kind of helped you think about how you wanted to make a difference. Ben, what brought you into this world and into this community?
Well, my career started as I started my career as a prosecutor in Virginia. And one of my assignments was to prosecute people that were violating the so-called red light laws, the pornography laws, the sexual exploitation laws. And I saw up close and personal how so many of these women were victims. They shouldn't have been criminalized. They were victims held captive by controllers, which we popularly call pimps. And then I saw the connection between pornography and how women are sexually exploited, children are sexually exploited in film and videos and so on. And my career went on, and I stayed in touch with Patrick Truman, who was president of the National Center. And in the meantime, I was asked to write a couple of books on my experience as a prosecutor, and I wrote a how to prosecute obscenity case book, which you can still get on Amazon. It's in the Library of Congress. And I wrote another one on how to write zoning ordinances to deal with sexually oriented businesses. And so that kind of gave me some cred in the area. Then I went on and I was a litigation lawyer for many years doing other kinds of work. And then about 2.5 years ago, Pat Truman approached me and said, Ben, we're really ambitious at NCOSE. We think we can end this problem, destroy it by getting active in the courts. As Don said, now is the time. We began hearing about Harvey Weinstein and the Epstein scandal and the Me Too movement, and the feminists were on board. And so I said, Pat, I'll come aboard on one condition. I don't want a job just to have a job. I'm in it to win. Let's take this decade or even sooner and destroy the online pornography industry that's wrecking so many homes and lives. And so he said, well, let's go. And so first thing we did was to create a plan of action, a 10-point plan of action, that if we do these 10 things, we can be successful. And we've been slowly rolling them out, implementing them over the last 2 years. And we've been blessed with remarkable success to date. And we've attracted some really good people to join the effort. And I'm getting well beyond your question, but I have a heart for the work. I have a heart for the victims, and I want to help them any way I can using the legal system.
Well, I mean, I would have to imagine for an organization like NCOSE to have somebody with your depth of experience and background to join the organization, to join the mission that NCOSE has, makes a real difference to those that work there. Right? And to be able to have you as the director for the law center as well, and working with younger attorneys with your experience, I'm sure they gain a lot of insight and a different perspective. So, that's fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. So let me ask you both, because, I know that as Ben just pointed out, over the past several years, and I don't want to kind of say this is a new thing, but especially in the past few years, especially with cases like the Me Too movement and everything else, what's happening in the world with sexual exploitation, with sex trafficking and everything else has really come to the forefront in the media, in the news. It's become an issue that a lot of people are more aware of. So what is NCOSE and what is its mission?
Thank you. Well, we are working towards a world free from sexual abuse and exploitation, and we really believe that that's possible. And the way that we are trying to fulfill that mission is through research, litigation, and corporate and legislative advocacy. Many know us I'll just elaborate a little bit on that. Many know us because of our corporate work. We have transformed entire industries, the social media industry, the cable and internet industries, the airline industry, because what happens is a lot of these corporations have policies that facilitate or foster sexual abuse and exploitation. Maybe they provide pornography. Maybe they let their customers view pornography on an airplane, for example. The biggest one was on airplanes. They used to let people just watch it. We changed all of the airlines' policies. When people were watching pornography on the airlines, they were very frequently acting out against fellow passengers and flight attendants, creating, a very hostile climate up in the air where you can't get out. You're boxed in. So we, a couple of kind of big changes. TikTok, for example, they have come out. They were really the worst social media platform for kids. There's so much exploitation on there. Predators flocked to their platform because there were no parental controls. There was no way to separate the bad content from the okay content for kids. So we went to them over the last 18 months, and they have completely transformed their policies to now be actually the best ones out of all the social media platforms. The question is, will they implement those policies? Like, this all happened a couple weeks ago, and so we're still working to see how it's implemented. But that's what we're known for. And the way that we do this corporate advocacy is we invite the public to join with us. We invite them to send emails to CEOs to help us name them and demand they change on social media. You know, Comcast, for example, was selling, like, out of 100 pornography titles they were selling, 70 of them were racist themed. So what happened? We got a group of people, an army of people, to start tweeting at them. Comcast then has changed drastically. Not only did they change the type of content they were selling with pornography, but they also improved the internet service provider aspect of them, and adding like filters at the router level so that parents can then better protect their kids. The same thing happened with hotels. I'm focusing on the pornography piece, but hotels for years have sold pornography, right? Like, it's a normal thing. You'd get in a hotel room, you turn on the TV, and up is an ad for pornography. We got almost all hotels to stop selling it, but the way that happened was 1,000 people were emailing the CEO of Hilton a week, and Hilton wrote us and called us and said, can you do something about this? And we said, we will if you meet. And once you meet with them and you explain to them the public health impacts, the role pornography plays in child-on-child harmful sexual behavior, or the role pornography plays in driving demand for sex trafficking and prostitution, they get it and they change their policies. So we have done a lot of corporate advocacy work. Research is key. There is so much research, I said earlier, about the intersection between all of these abuse and exploitation issues, but like the average person doesn't know. You're not going to read a 40-page neuro study on X, Y, and Z. And so we summarize and synthesize and get that out to the public, to elected officials, to business leaders, to the media. And that's made a big difference. We're also engaged at the legislative side. Maybe I'll just toss the ball over to you, Ben, to talk about a little bit of the legislative and legal work we're engaged in.
Right. Well, our public policy team is on Capitol Hill in the age of COVID every day. You know, of course, we do everything like this on Zoom. But we're really fortunate to have good relationships with the members of the Senate Judiciary Committee and also on the House side. And we've been involved in writing a lot of legislation. We helped write a bill called the Earn It Act, which would go a long way to protecting children from being exploited by online pornography companies. Yeah, we don't, I mentioned a 10-point plan of action to be successful. One of those 10 points was to be successful on the public policy side. You know, you see the public sentiment that is rising up and recognizing, hey, that women are victims. They're not going to take it anymore, that they're being victimized, that pornography is the symbiology of victimization of women, because it reduces women to being orifices and instruments for the gratification of men. They don't have any inherent value. Well, that kind of public sentiment is beginning to seep into Congress, and we're getting a lot of requests to us saying, we want to do something. We want to protect the women and the children. What should we do? So we have a meeting tomorrow, for example, with Senator's staff, in which we have about 7 points. You need to make it illegal to upload pornography videos without the consent of the performers. You need to make it illegal to upload sexually explicit videos of children without getting age verification. You know, which they don't do today. Anybody can upload anything without age verification, without getting the consent of the performers. And as a result, you're having thousands of people exploited online when they were trafficked, either because they were runaways and they were children, or they made a bad decision by putting some videos or some pictures of themselves, sending it to a friend who turned against them later, then uploaded it to Pornhub, where it's monetized. And so there's a lot of legislation that's coming out of Congress that it's really exciting right now. And this is one of the areas where the Democrats and the Republicans agree on both sides that something must be done. So we have great relationships with the Democrats. Senator Feinstein, we're working with her, and also the Republicans. And it's kind of neat to watch. This is a bridge that we can all join together and do some work on.
What would you both say are kind of the key issues? So you've touched on a couple of things with the with pornography, especially things like consent. And I know, even in my job, I've come across cases where, there's been issues with revenge porn. Somebody dates somebody, they share some sexual images or content with the other person. And then when they break up, that person uploads that content online. And, to try and stop it is basically impossible, because once it's out there, people have copied it and it's just everywhere. So what do you think are some of the key issues that you talked about? Some legislative things that are happening. You talked about some corporate relationships that you've built to make some changes with the airline industry, with the hotel industries. So, in thinking about your focus, what do you think are some of the key focuses right now that you have going on?
Thanks for asking that. We're engaged in a number of exploitation and abuse issues. Image-based sexual abuse, like revenge pornography, sextortion, those are all very key. So are sexual harassment and assault issues. I would say, though, that our three main areas revolve around making pornography intolerable in society and creating projects and programs legislatively, in the courts, and with our corporate work to help people understand the public health impacts coming from pornography. So that's one, and I'll come back to that in a minute. The other is protecting kids and vulnerable peoples online. It's like the normal experience of our youth to be online and to be solicited for sex. You all might not believe me, but I'll say, as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I was preparing to give a presentation to leaders in Salt Lake. And so we hosted 3 kind of focus groups with youth from our church, ages 16 to 18, in 3 different states: Virginia, Arizona, Washington. We asked them 4 questions. 1, have you ever seen pornography on any of the social media sites you're on? And they all said yes, like 100%, right? Of course they have. It's the wallpaper of their lives. 2, have you ever been asked to create pornography and send it to somebody? Almost all of them said yes. All of them in Virginia, where I led it, and like 9 out of 10 in Arizona, and almost all of them in Washington. Yes, they've been asked to create pornography by a stranger and send it. We asked them if they'd ever been sent a nude image from a stranger, unsolicited. Almost all of our youth said yes. Almost all of them are receiving nude images from strangers on social media. And then we also asked them, the 4th question was, have you ever been solicited for sex? Has anybody asked you to perform a sex act in exchange for something of monetary value? And all 10 of the youth here in Virginia said yes, and most of them in Arizona and Washington also said yes. I just share this to help all of you understand really the experience of our young people online. It's different. It's more aggressive for them than it is for us older individuals. It's hard for us to understand their experience. And the problem is they're not going to tell their parents, because they don't want their parents to say, now you can't be on Instagram. So this is the world that they're having to navigate. And so we're really working to hold big tech accountable. They have to create safer spaces. We just filed a lawsuit against Twitter because they knowingly facilitate trafficking and child sexual abuse on their platform, not to mention a host of other harms. So we're holding these tech platforms accountable through litigation, but also through our corporate advocacy, grassroots work, and then also through legislation. You know, we've got a big bill pending in Utah that would force manufacturers to turn on filters. We have the Earn It Act, like Ben mentioned, that's putting pressure on these big tech companies to have better policies and safety measures in place, otherwise they lose their immunity. So we could get into this more, but that's the second area. And the third area of big focus for us is combating the demand for prostitution and sex trafficking. You know, it's so important that we provide services to survivors of the commercial sexual and sex industry, but we have to stop that industry in its tracks. And the way to stop it is to go after the men who think they can buy people for sex. The demand, we call it demand. There would be no sex industry if there was no demand for it from men. And so creating policies both legislatively in the courts, on the ground with law enforcement that really focuses on going after sex buyers and not the victims is a big key area of focus for us.
You know, can I add something? We're talking about legislation. You know, so many women who are trafficked, and they're forced to make these coerced sex videos when they're either being beaten or there are threats against them or against their family, or they're high on drugs. And so they do these videos and they're uploaded and they consent. Then years later, they come out of that life. They're survivors now. And those videos are still up there. So Pornhub and these online pornography providers generally will not delete the videos when they're contacted by these women because they've executed or signed a consent. So we're recommending that Congress pass a law that under these circumstances, a woman can reverse her consent or withdraw her consent to have her body shown like this on the internet forever. Believe it or not, right now, there's no law that gives her the right to pull that off of the internet once she purports to have consented. And it's a huge area. And you know, we're talking a lot about legislation a bit, but the Twitter situation is so classic, and there's so many lessons we can learn from this. We've sued them on behalf of a child who's still a minor and his parents. And obviously we can't say the names of these folks because we sued them as John Does. Mm-hmm. But this was, I can't tell you the story. This little boy was, when he was 13 years old, he was on Twitter and he met a beautiful girl who said she was 16. And she sent him some pictures of her, some explicit pictures, and asked for some pictures of him. So he sent them. Then he sent some more. And then he sent more engaging with him engaging in a sex act. Well, she began extorting him, saying, I need more and more explicit pictures. So he cut off the relationship. It turns out that this girl wasn't 16. She was an adult. And when he was 16 years old, while he was in school, some friends of his said, hey, I saw your picture on Twitter. And the girl had basically taken his pictures, made a video of them, and posted it online. And so the mother found out, and the first thing she did was to reach out to Twitter, demanding that these videos of her child, when he's a minor, it's child pornography, be taken down. And she sent along his government-issued ID showing that he was 13 at the time. A couple of days later, Twitter got back to them and said, we've reviewed your request and reviewed the material, and it does not violate our policy. We will not delete it or take it down. This is impossible to believe. This was child pornography. And so finally, through a church friend of a friend, she got somebody from the Homeland Office, the federal government law enforcement office, to reach out to Twitter on her behalf. And finally, they pulled them offline. during those 2 weeks, there were 166 views of this little boy and countless downloads. And those downloads can now be uploaded to the internet anytime. And so we filed a lawsuit, certainly to have a degree of justice given this little boy and his family, but also to have Twitter become a responsible corporate actor. Basically, today, anybody can upload hardcore pornography on Twitter. Anybody, whether they're a minor or not. You know, the safeguards it purports to have are a sham. They're not real. It's like Confederate money. You can't spend it. It's not. And so that's why this lawsuit is important in a variety of ways. We filed it in San Francisco yesterday. And, you know, as we all know, those of us who are lawyers, law teaches. And we've written the complaint in a way that a judge or a journalist or an educator or a parent who reads it will learn what's happening and can draw conclusions. Because remember, we can't change the culture unless we change decisions, unless we get the corporation's attention. I think in time, this corporation is going to end up paying a lot of money in damages to this little boy and his family. But equally important is that it changes its business practice so there's no more kids like this out there as they are today.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that strikes me from what both of you have said is, you know, I think a lot of people, when they think of sexual exploitation, they think of faceless people who are lost, right? Runaways, people who are abusing drugs and everything else. But this is, you know, children. It's children who are being exploited online on social media platforms. You know, parents are there. They think they've created safeguards to protect their children, but this is happening every day and it's seeping into homes and it's impacting families and individuals across the country. It's not just runaways or people being trafficked into this country, because I think that's the other misconception that people have is these are foreign nationals that are being brought in here to be exploited because of their circumstances, and the work that you're doing really has a much broader spectrum of inclusivity for children and young people out there who, through, you know, as you said, like just trying to engage or build friendships with people, they're being, you know, induced into doing things that they would never do.
Yeah, let me add this. There's so many good kids out there that make some bad decisions and affects their life for the rest of their life. You know, we're working with a young girl who's now an adult, but when she was 15 years old, she was walking home from a friend's house in the evening, and she was grabbed by 3 men in a car, thrown in the back, taken, essentially kidnapped, taken across town to an empty facility, empty building, and she was raped all night long. And the next day they drove her further out in the middle of nowhere, dropped her off. Somebody found her, called the police. She went to the hospital, filed a criminal complaint, and they arrested the young men and they were prosecuted. But what she didn't know until she, you know, it took her a while to get herself emotionally and physically back together. But when she went back to school, one day her friends were kind of looking at her laughing. And what these boys had done was videotape the rape and uploaded it to Pornhub. And of course, the girl's father immediately tried to get Pornhub to pull the videos down. And it took months, 3 months, before the videos were removed from that particular platform. Now, this was a good kid. And during those 3 months, remember, Pornhub is kind of like YouTube, except that you can download anything you see. So during that time, there were not only countless views, but there were countless downloads of her rape. This is child pornography. And so anybody either have them at home or they can upload them again. You know, the Nicholas Kristof, who is a Pulitzer-winning prize writer for the New York Times, wrote a wonderful piece right before Christmas, an expose in the New York Times about a company called MindGeek, which owns dozens, hundreds of these pornography websites. And immediately, the day after, or 2 days after that story was published, and it was read by millions of people, Pornhub deleted 11 million videos from its websites. 11 million. Well, I have to ask, what was it in that article that they didn't know before? Because there was nothing new that was reported. They were complicit in the whole thing. And the article was about how children are being trafficked on Pornhub, which charges admission or advertising to see the videos. And this is, again, this is happening right now. As we're recording this, videos are being uploaded. People are watching this stuff. And they don't realize the whole generation of young people are being victimized and exploited and hurt and ruined in many instances.
Why do you think people should, I mean, this is such a huge issue, as you've repeatedly pointed out. Why do you think people should care when they, as I said, we tend to think of it's the other, it's not happening here. Why do you think this is such an important issue that people need to listen? Why should people pay attention to what's happening and the need for change in laws?
Well, I would disagree and say it is happening here. And as you start to have more conversations with those you love, those close to you, you'll start to see that this web of sexual abuse and exploitation is touching your life and the lives of those you love. There's no way around it today. It like I said earlier, kind of pornography, exploitation, objectification, and abuse, it's the wallpaper of young people's lives. Unless you're locking them in a basement somewhere, never giving them access to the internet, never letting them walk outside your home, they're being exposed and they're being touched by this stuff. And so if we want a world where human dignity is possible, where love is possible, where real human connection is possible, then we have to step up and we have to oppose sexual exploitation wherever we can. And it's not enough to just have PSAs or educational campaigns. That is not enough. We have to hold these big mainstream corporations that hold up these industries accountable. We have to demand that they get out of the business of abuse and exploitation, that they change their policies. We have to demand that Congress help us, that the state legislatures help us. And really, if you look at any other movement that's had good impact and success, whether you agree with it or not, they've all been active in our courts and in our legislatures. This movement to end exploitation and abuse hasn't until now. We've been weak there and we have lost a lot of ground. The pornography industry, the traffickers, the pimps, all of them have put so much money into building up this web that props them up. We can have major victories if we just speak up in the courts and legislatures. So that's part of why we're here with you. We are excited to invite the J. Reuben Clark Society to join with us in creating a more vocal legal movement to end sexual abuse and exploitation. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, and the thing is, like I said, part of the reason that we're doing this, there are many reasons why we're doing this and getting this message out, is because I really do, I'm a dad, I have 4 children. My children range in age from 19 to 11. And I think that, so many parents really want to put their head in the sand and pretend it's not happening. As I said, in my household, it must be other people's households. My kids are good kids, can't be, but you have to understand you've repeated it multiple times. This is the wallpaper of their existence, right? They are never without their devices. They're never without being on social media. And parents want to think that their kids are not on social media, but they find their ways. They find access to it because it is what everybody's doing and they want to be a part of it all. They want to know what's going on. So you've talked about legislation and you've talked about, partnering with corporations and, what do you think right now moving forward? You talked about this lawsuit that was just filed. What are some of the key things that NCOSE is doing right now? What are some of the projects that you have going on right now that you think people should know about?
Well, the J. Reuben Clark Society could be instrumental in answering that question. Dawn mentioned that we want to create a campaign. I would say we want to be this, as a law center, we want to be a catalyst for hundreds of lawsuits to take on the online pornography industry to sue them on behalf of trafficked victims, trafficked women, trafficked children, so on. We looked to the tobacco industry. When the first 6 months on the job, I thought, what other giants that seemed bulletproof, indestructible were taken down? And the first one that comes to mind is big tobacco. When I was a kid, they used to sell these candy cigarettes in the drugstores where you could pretend to smoke them, little stuff would come out of the end. Smoking was not only not bad for you, it was good for you if you had a filter. Okay, all that has been turned on its head. The scientific research caught up with that. But the fact is that really good plaintiffs' law firms filed countless lawsuits against big tobacco on behalf of the victims. And the first generation of the lawsuits were lost, but eventually they started winning. And big tobacco, as we know it, has been brought to its knees. Now it's politically, legally, socially, culturally, politically incorrect to light a cigarette in a public place, in many homes, for example, in a car. We looked at that. We looked at that model, and we basically want to take the best pieces of that and apply them. So one key aspect is recruiting really good law firms and really good lawyers that want to take this on. Okay, and we're not talking about a couple of dozen law firms. We're talking about 100 law firms and a couple of thousand lawyers being a part of this movement. That doesn't mean that we have to be in relationship with them, but they can see what other lawyers are doing. And when a case comes to them, they say yes instead of no. Okay, that's one thing that we're doing. So we want to communicate that to the members of the society. And the second thing we're doing is we're identifying survivors who have the wherewithal and the emotional capacity to be plaintiffs in a tough lawsuit. One of the things we're learning is, as Dawn has known this far longer than I, really, that the survivors that come out of this, many of them are just broken. I would say maybe 1 out of 20, 1 out of 30 has the capacity to go through the rigors of a deposition, to recall in detail what happened, where they were, who did it, how often it happened, because they're reliving the trauma. And it's very, very, very difficult for these people. So we're working with survivor organizations to basically identify those victims who can be plaintiffs, and then working with the lawyers and law firms, in many instances, handing off the survivors to them. Or if they have a survivor client, as in the case of Twitter, the law firm had this client, but wasn't quite sure what to do with the complaint or what kind of complaint or what the law was. They reached out to us. We said, you've got a federal trafficking complaint that you can file in federal court. There's a law designed to deal exactly with your situation. So she approached us, the lawyer did, and now we're co-counseling the case together. So whether we initiate it or they initiate contacting us, again, we want to be a catalyst to be successful. And the third thing we're trying to do is develop really innovative, winning legal theories. And we talked about that, we call the TVPRA, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, which is a federal law that allows us to pierce the immunity that online providers currently have in most instances. You can see that you can sue them when they're engaged in trafficking. But we also have developed a products liability theory that is innovative, but it holds together on paper. We think it could be very effective. And again, that was another way to get around the existing immunity this entire industry has under a law called CDA 230, which you may have read about, or some of your members may have read about, because the online providers are bringing a defective product into every home in America. You mentioned you have kids. Well, we can demonstrate through our research that repeated exposure to online pornography causes a variety of harms, including changing the brain, including addiction, in the same way that gambling changes the brain and leads to addiction if you do it enough. We can demonstrate that. The studies are there, okay? The industry knows this. We can prove this in court. Well, if they know this and they've seen the studies, they've had thousands of complaints about this, why are they continuing to have this defective product in every home in America, without putting an ironclad filter on it that will protect children, which they don't do? You have to turn the filter on. Filter should be turned on when you buy it. And then if you choose to, you can turn it off. But instead of common sense, the exact opposite is the case. These computers that are given by the thousands to these poor schools, every kid who gets them can access hardcore pornography from the get-go. You know, why aren't the filters turned on? Why isn't this a defective product under products liability? We believe it is. And so we're developing that area. And what we need is some really smart lawyers in the Reuben Clark Society to come alongside us and say, you know, I'm a products liability guy and I like this idea. Let's work on it. And, you know, and we say, well, you know, we've got a couple of clients that are game to, you know, to be plaintiffs in a lawsuit. Let's go make history. Let's take the bad guys down.
I think if I could add to that too, another area is, you know, this is larger than the National Center's goals of creating a legal movement. We have a coalition of almost 600 other organizations around the world, many of whom do a lot of direct service with survivors, help, you know, homes where they can go, therapy, help with jobs, all those kinds of things too. And what we're finding, I want to also clarify, I think the most important kind of tool we have is the experiences and the voice of survivors. Mm-hmm. When they speak up about what's happened to them, people listen and they change and they want to change. The problem is that so many individuals who have endured these horrific ordeals, they're not in a place where they can speak up. So they need a lot of help. They need a lot of healing. They need people to come alongside of them. Part of their problem is a lot of, because they've been engaged in the commercial sex industry, they've been slapped with other legal issues. Like they've received felonies for a host of other things, but it's all related to their being trafficked, or their kids were removed from them. You know, often, so many that we've heard, they're impregnated by their trafficker or by a sex buyer. And then the traffickers take their kids from them as a way to keep keep leverage over them. In order for these women, mostly women, to be able to move forward in life, they need other legal help. And that's where we also see the J. Reuben Clark Society coming in, is whether pro bono or for a reduced fee, helping survivors of sexual abuse and exploitation with other legal needs. Many are brought here from other countries, and they're entitled to stay in our country because they were trafficked. But they need help with immigration. They need help in the, you know, family courts and elsewhere. And so that's another way, I think, where your attorneys could really jump in and help this movement really become much stronger and more united.
Yeah, and you know, on that, you know, I understand that what we're actually planning to do, this is the first in a series of videos that we're going to do. And so we're going to build on this idea of how people can help and get engaged and provide information moving forward so that more people can connect with your organization, connect with you. You know, I like, you know, Ben, you brought up the issue of tobacco, right? The tobacco industry. And that change that occurred. You know, I grew up in Ireland and everybody smoked. You know, when you turned 10 or 11, you know, people were handing you a cigarette here, you need to try this, right? And it was just part of the culture. You know, I can't talk to the culture here in the US. It wasn't where I grew up. But, you know, now smoking is illegal there. It's banned, right? You can't smoke indoors. You can't smoke in a lot of outdoor areas. You know, it really has changed the viewpoint of it. So thinking of something along that lines here in the US with this, with pornography, with sexual exploitation, how would you answer when you've got people that are like, look, I'm an adult, you know, if I want to engage in observing pornography or whatever else, what do you say to that kind of mentality? Because there are people out there who say, you know, I should be able to do what I want. I think I know what you're going to say, but I'd love to hear your responses to that.
Well, I'd say, and I have said this before in court, that pornography exploits performers. Mm-hmm. That it's the most exploitive, dehumanizing, degrading product in America today. That it's not about you, it's about the women and the victims that are involved in the production of pornography. And I'd say, you know what, how often are you looking at that porn online? Because if you look at it enough, your brain's going to change, and it's going to take more and more harder and harder, more extreme pornography to get that kind of high that you like. And I can prove it. Here, let me show you the scientific study and the results of how it calluses people to the plight of women, how it causes people to identify with rapists instead of rape victims, how it changes attitudes. So it's not, Dawn, I know that you deal with this in a lot of the work you do too. I'd love to hear your take on that as well.
I have like hours of things I would say.
No.
But I think just most recently, I've been doing some research, and there was a big New York Times article that came out about this website OnlyFans, where people can, create their own, supposedly their own, although we know many are under duress of traffickers, pornographic content, sexually explicit content, and then sell it for a fee. But what I've been reading, like the New York Times piece on all these forums, is that so many of the women that are being pushed there are either under traffickers, or they're often also under duress from other factors. Like they have to, it's COVID, like the economy is falling, and so many people, especially women, are out of work as they try to manage their kids, virtual schooling, working, all of that. And so many women are being pushed to create porn because they don't have any other economic stability. And it's causing immense physical trauma and emotional and mental trauma that they're enduring. So I think the short answer is that there are so many harms to society, to the performers, and to others other than yourself if you're viewing pornography. We do want you to, we're not trying to take away your choice. You can make the choice to view it or not. But what we are trying to do is make it intolerable in society and hold those big entities accountable that are propping it up and pushing more women and more children into that industry who are being hurt and abused. So, short answer.
But what I'm hearing from you both is like, this might be your choice, but for these performers, for so many people engaged in providing that material, it's not their choice. They don't have a choice in this, whether it's by force or whether it's by socioeconomic conditions that push them into these, situations. They don't have a voice or a choice in it. And then when they do find their voice, the way legislation and the way these organizations are set up, it's not there to protect them and remove the material that they engaged in when they were forced into it. So you might have a choice, but think about those people who are providing that material, who are the content of that material, and their lack of choice, right?
It's the choice of the choiceless.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's another factor we haven't talked about that I think is hugely important, and that is that just to pick Pornhub, for example, which is one of perhaps the largest website, there's an entire genre of racist pornography. Basically, there are tens of thousands, and I'm not exaggerating, videos of young Black women being abused and desecrated and used in every conceivable way. And I can't even tell you what the titles are, because some people would be offended if I said that, but I can generally describe the plot of one, give you an idea. Young girl, totally naked, she may be 20, but she looks like she's about 14. Hangman's noose around her neck. Two guys, white guys, dressed in overalls, basically do everything imaginable, including urinating on her, excrement, rubbing it all over her, again, having sex with every single orifice. And this goes on for about 20 minutes. And afterwards they say, now let's go hang the NB. And that's how it closes. Okay. There's an entire genre that seems to get their jollies watching this. In the era of, we talk about systematic racism. We talk about Black Lives Matter, and they do matter. Why are we tolerating this? Why? This is the only place in America today where racism is not only tolerated, it's encouraged, because they advertise these videos. And there's the same kind of genre, a subcategory of pornography related to abusing Asian women. again, tens of thousands of videos of Asian women's being indescribably abused. And you know, these videos are marketed to a certain segment of society, which frankly are sick in terms of looking at this. But you know, monkey see, monkey do. It also influences behaviors and attitudes towards that people have towards minorities and towards Asian people, women, and so forth. So it's a learning tool. All media teaches. You know, you wonder why during the Super Bowl they can charge what, $50 million for 30 seconds of advertising, because they know they can impact the values, the ideas, and the behavior of millions of people. But what does it do when people watch countless hours of this kind of imagery? What does it do to their attitudes? And you know, their kids could be going out with your daughter. So it's a real issue. It's not just a guy sitting at home looking at a magazine in the privacy of his home. It's a lot more complicated than that.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of something positive now to add so we can end on something positive.
Positive is we can win this battle, and we are winning.
Well,
you know?
I mean, I appreciate that, because I mean, there are so many levels and dynamics to what's happening in this industry, in how it impacts people on so many different spectrums, and the way it shapes minds, as you've said repeatedly. So in thinking about, you know, Dawn just said, thinking about positives, you know, right now I know that you're engaged in changing legislation. I know that you're engaged in, as I've said multiple times, the work with corporate industries. What would you say are some of the positive takeaways, especially over the past year, that you've seen and experienced in the work that you're doing that is shaping and changing the shape of the world in which we live in?
Well, I think that getting these big corporations to change, and then when they make statements about it, that's culture changing. I'll say some of my favorite victories are with Google. We've gotten Google to change their policies around ads that they allow. They don't allow any ads for prostitution, sex buying, pornography, sexually explicit content anymore. They used to make tons of money on that. They don't allow it anymore. They don't allow sexually exploitive apps in the Google Play. They've changed drastically the algorithms for Google Images. They've enabled safe search. We've been fighting like tooth and nail with them for years. But the thing that gets me is, if we can change Google, we can change Google. We can change anything. Also, I think also a really encouraging thing happened this week with the New York Mets. For example, the general manager it came out that he had sent 62 sexually harassing text messages to a female reporter a few years ago. And though they went unanswered, he sent images of his genitals, clothed and unclothed. He wouldn't stop. And it came out, now he has a new job with the New York Mets, and it came out he was fired within 24 hours. And the owner of the New York Mets said, "This is not acceptable behavior. We will not stand for this here." That is huge. That shows really how much society has changed in the last couple of years. The fact that a massive sports team would hold their, one of their biggest stars accountable and fire them because of such poor behavior, men's violence against women. I see a lot of hope there in that way. And also, I could just keep going, but there is bipartisan support. I mean, this country right now, it has been tumultuous, right? Like on every side, feelings are hurt. It's emotional. Who's right? Who's wrong? Can we ever work together? On these issues of defending human dignity, we are working together. It isn't divided. And so there is unity. There is unity there, and that brings me so much hope.
You know, I'm going to mention another encouraging development as well. You know, let's look at Hollywood. You know, we know that couch casting has been a part of Hollywood since its beginning, since say 1900. That there are sleazy directors that basically will require the actresses they cast to sleep with them. Well, that's been around forever. Why suddenly did Harvey Weinstein get prosecuted for this? Well, I think a zeitgeist moment, a wake-up moment occurred where finally these women who'd been complaining about this for decades finally got traction. They were heard. The culture finally was ready to say no more, not enough. And that, of course, launched the Me Too movement as well. And you're seeing, for example, when I started working as a lawyer, there were, a few decades ago, you go into places of business and you'd see basically scantily clad women on calendars on the wall. You'd see posters and people looking, Playboys laying around where men and women work. Today, the EEOC would be all over you for a Title VII violation because that creates a sexually hostile work environment. Those words didn't even exist 30 years ago. They do now, right? And so that's a cultural shift that happened. The same way that suddenly, when did cigarettes become, politically non grata? That you can't, if you smoke someplace, people just stare at you. And they do this and walk away. Well, there was a moment in time when that occurred, and I think we're just about there on this issue.
Because I do think that if you look at the most recent few years, we see this cultural movement and this shifting taking place. So you don't feel that we're fully there yet, but we are making it there. And as you both pointed out, this is gaining traction and support from all sides, from both sides of the political spectrum, from people across the world who are engaged and supporting this movement in changing, how people perceive and tolerate this kind of abuse.
Yeah, let me just another encouraging thing. When Pornhub had that article written about it in the New York Times, and they started getting hit with a lot of criticism from other media, and the credit card companies stopped processing payments to Pornhub, and this they issued a press release. They said that all of their problems are because of National Center on Sexual Exploitation and another organization. Well, I know both those. Our little organization, we have about 20 people. We're tiny. If I told you our budget, you'd laugh. And all we're doing is telling the truth. Just think if a tiny little organization can get credit or blame from Pornhub for 11 million videos being deleted, think what we can do if we join hands and you really have powerful institutions speaking up. Think of the change we could do in a hurry.
I can't wait for further conversations with all of you. So,
yeah, no, I mean, this, I really do appreciate I know you're both incredibly busy, and between the work that you're doing and just being parents and the world that we're currently living in, I really appreciate you both taking time out of your day to meet with me to kind of share the beginning for us. As I said, this is going to be one of a series of short interviews that we're going to be doing and learning more about the work that you're involved in, what NCOSE is doing. So I really do appreciate your willingness to talk with me today and to share your experiences and to get people thinking about what they can do and prepare for the next interviews that are coming. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. We've just begun to fight. So welcome aboard.
Well,
thank you. Our honor, our privilege.
Thank you. Bye.